This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into this bonus special edition of Still Enrolled. As always, Brian Hickey, Brian Tripp with you here. As Tripp, we are now just a few days away from a colossal top 5 matchup at Beaver Stadium, Ohio State, Penn State. And we figured, look, we're going to give you our preview on Thursday. Nothing changes there, but we figure with this big-time game here, let's get one of the biggest voices in all of college football covering the Big Ten specifically on the show. So we have for you team captain, national champion, Joshua Perry here, about to join us, Tripp. Very excited.
Yeah, Joshua, it's been fun to watch him during his meteoric rise in his media career. Obviously played at Ohio State, was a leader on a great team, and you and I kind of went down memory lane, and we're going to have a chance to ask him about this. But some of the names that he played with on that team and how the 2014 Ohio State team won the national championship, how they got there with Cardale Jones, right? This is a team that lost early in the year. They found a way to make it to the college football playoff. And this was the first year of the college football playoff, correct? That they went and won the national championship under Urban Meyer. And it's been fun to watch him. I think when he started with Big Ten Network and now what he's done for NBC on the national stage, not that he wasn't on a national stage with Big Ten Network, but thoughtful, concise, everything that he brings to the analyst seat is what you want in someone in that role. And he's just smart. He knows the game inside and out, but I think he's got an analytical and an intelligent perspective that he brings with him. And I think a continued rise is in store for Joshua Perry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But for this week and for today, he's joining us to talk about this big game, Ohio State, Penn State. Like you said, Tripp, go down memory lane. Talk about now as the Buckeyes are celebrating that 10-year anniversary of their last national championship. Talk about what he sees from this Buckeye team overall. Do they possess that championship DNA, for lack of a better term, that the 2014 team did? Well, Joshua will tell us right now. All right, welcome back into the Still Enrolled pod. A man here who knows a thing or two about winning. Captain as part of the 2014 national championship winning Ohio State Buckeyes, now does a tremendous job on Big Ten College Countdown for NBC. It is none other than Joshua Perry. Joshua, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you guys having me. Excited to talk some ball here.
Likewise. And speaking of excitement here, we've both been excited in this new Big Ten era here in 2024, where you have obviously the additions of Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA. What's it kind of been like, observing now, especially for NBCs, you guys are the lead into the Big Ten game of the week. What's it been like watching this new Big Ten unfold this year?
I think it's been fun. One of the things I can say about the Big Ten is it certainly feels like it's strong at the top, but also like through the middle of the conference. And I'm looking at teams like Washington, for example, a team like USC is probably falling short of expectations, but both teams that can present challenges to some of the top teams in the conference on a week-to-week basis. Oregon has been such a fun story to watch, and just coming in and kind of setting the tone that they're not somebody to be taken lightly in the Big Ten. It's been a lot of fun for us, and really some of the personalities out there between the coaches and the players that we've gotten to enjoy as well. Been awesome. I think the Big Ten is in as good of a spot as it's been.
What's it like for you on a Saturday? Like for me, I'm at a game, so I really only get to see 1 or 2 games on a Saturday. For you to sit back and watch the noon game, watch the 3:30 game as you're preparing to go on air, and then see one of the primetime games of the week on NBC. What is a Saturday like for you? Put us in your shoes.
No, it's been a lot of fun. Last year we were on the road and it was a little bit more difficult to take in the games, but certainly there was a lot of time for viewing. This year, being in studio in Connecticut, it's been awesome. I'll get in right before the noon games kick off. And I'll typically start my day back at the hotel watching the pregame shows. I've always been a fan of Game Day, and I think Big Noon does a great job. And so getting the lead in, seeing what everybody's talking about. But as we sit in the screening room, it's awesome because those are where the conversations really start to develop. And we'll build a rundown early in the week. We'll meet about it on Fridays, but really there's a lot of blank space in there to talk about the events that happen throughout the day. And I think being a lead into a primetime game is phenomenal because we do get that aspect of talk about the big stories everybody else is talking about but also spin it forward and talk about our game and the potential consequences of this week into next weekend or whatever the case is, especially now with the CFP rankings coming out. So the screening of the games might actually be the favorite part because of all the conversations that happen in there.
And it's different too this year, Joshua, because of the 12-team playoff, right? Like these games are very important. And we saw Oregon, Ohio State a few weeks ago. It was a massive game and really entertaining. But like the one loss ends your season drama is obviously no longer there because we saw Ohio State lose that game. We've seen other teams lose, but their playoff hopes are still well within reach. No worry about their season being over already. What's like when you look at this matchup, for example, now Ohio State, Penn State, whether it was Oregon, Ohio State a few weeks ago, like how does your approach, like what is, I guess, how much pressure and important are these games still where one game no longer does judge your season?
Well, I think the reaction from the outcomes tells us that these games are still important, right? Like the Ohio State fan base after losing to Oregon, like was in complete meltdown mode. Certainly it tells you how important they think those games are. Even last week for Ohio State, like off of a win that wasn't good enough, people are completely melting down in Columbus. So, a lot of people had the concern about how important the games would feel. And I think you just look at fans, how did Alabama fans feel after they lost to Vanderbilt? It's not a good feeling. Certainly you go back to even Notre Dame. And I tried to tell people, this is the story of 2014 for me. And we didn't know what to expect in the playoff era. It was the first year, but we lose in week 2 and everybody's like, we're out. And by the way, I think Michigan lost that weekend and Michigan State lost that weekend. So a lot of people thought the Big Ten was completely out. And you're not. And so like Notre Dame loses to NIU. And I try to come on air and be like, they went out, they're probably still in this thing. And that's where we're sitting at right now. So I think there's still this visceral response to how people feel about their teams, regardless of how much hope is left in the season. But this idea that we get to let things play out and people can still be bought in after having that first loss. And for some teams, you're a 2-loss team and you're still bought in because there's a path to get to the playoff. I do think that's a positive.
Joshua, I want to talk a little bit about your career and playing on those Ohio State teams coming up in just a bit. But you mentioned the concern that fans have for Ohio State. Is it fair? Are there rightful concerns about the Buckeyes right now?
I think there's some concerns, no doubt. The trends in the big games, they exist, and I think they're real, and I think it deserves a conversation. Ryan Day, people talk about 2-6 record against top 5 teams, and I think the biggest thing that's disappointing there is like you're as good or better than the teams that you've lost to in these situations. They come into these games a lot of times favored, top 5 ranking as well. That's conversation I think people need to have as you get into the X's and O's. Like the offensive line is a problem. And at a place like Ohio State, I don't think people are used to seeing position groups look so thin. And so I do think it's real. I also think, again, in the era that we're in right now, where you are afforded the opportunity to make mistakes as a football team, the opportunity to continue to get better as a football team, probably should reserve like the Mayday takes for the end of the year when all of the stories are written. But I understand it. And frankly, like the expectation is high. And you could say it's never been higher in Columbus. I think that's fair, but it's always been like that. And I think, Urban Meyer, guy who I played for, love him to death, but kind of set up an unrealistic expectation for people too. The start of my career was when he came into Ohio State. 2012, we went 12-0. 2013, we went 12-0 in the regular season. Then we lost the Big Ten championship and we lost our bowl game. But then you come in 2014, that was another season that was phenomenal. We won the championship. And then, 15 is 11-1 and we finish off with a bowl game win. And it's just uncommon to string together success like that. It's, very few people, Kirby, Nick Saban, but like when you start eating caviar, you start driving nice cars, you start wearing Rolexes, you don't want to do anything else. And so I get it.
Speaking of, because this matchup is really interesting from that perspective, Joshua, because you just mentioned Ryan Day's record 2-6 against AP top 5 teams, 4 losses in a row in that stretch. And James Franklin, that record's been thrown around there a lot by fans in the national media, a lot of Penn State fans as well. He's 1-12 against top 5 teams. Going into this matchup of a top 5 matchup, who would you say is more pressure coaching wise on them to get this win here?
I think it's still Ryan Day. And you mentioned the record there for James Franklin. It's like he's the only coach, I think, in like Ryan Day's pay grade that is probably worse at these big games. But Penn State does not have a loss yet, so they still have that wiggle room to be able to lose a game like this and make the playoff. And I know a lot of Penn State fans are like, this is a measuring stick, because if we lose this game, how do we really expect that we would win the college football playoff? I fully understand that. But I also look at these games for James Franklin where, like, how many of these matchups would he have been favored in, right? Like, he's not favored in this one that's coming up. And I do think Vegas is a solid indicator of where these teams actually are. For the Ohio State side of it, as I mentioned before, a lot of times they are favored. And the Penn State thing has been one where it's like, okay, we might not beat Michigan and we don't know what's going to happen in the postseason, but we know we can get this win. And so it becomes this idea of like, okay, well, now they're a top 5 team. Like, can you actually pull it off for Ryan Day? It would be the second loss. Certainly wouldn't be out of it, but the path becomes a lot murkier to make the playoff. So I'm looking at Ohio State as feeling more pressure going on the road to play this game.
Let me take a look at this from, a big picture type of hypothetical because of the new playoff. And I think Penn State's the perfect example this week. If Drew Aller is not 100% and can't go, now as a coach, you certainly want to win every game and you want to position yourself for a Big Ten championship. But is there in this new era, and again, Penn State's the perfect example this week, where you don't have to play Drew Aller if your goal is to be 11-1 and get in a playoff because of where you set up? Like, are these all new circumstances and factors that you think coaches truly are evaluating and thinking going into a matchup like this, where they do have a reliable backup, but Bo Prabula, who played really well against Wisconsin in a game NBC had last week?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because I think coaches are so hardwired to say, like, we got to go out there and we got to put ourselves in the best position. And so I think it's really hard for them to get there. I think if it did come down to that situation and like Drew Aller wasn't 100%, couldn't go, whatever the case is, I think their minds would probably fall back into this idea of it's not the worst thing in the world for us. And the committee has said they're supposed to take these things into account, right? Like if you had to play with your backup, they're supposed to consider it's a part of having the human element there. I don't know what the hell they even consider most of the time because it's just like on a week to week, whichever way the wind blows. Now, speaking of Bo, I thought his performance was great, very efficient throwing the football. He's got great movement skill. And it almost feels like we know Drew Aller is the better quarterback, but he feels a little bit more natural in Andy Kotelnicki's offense because of all of the conflict they like to create, all of the movement that exists. And now you have a quarterback who's really dangerous with his legs. So I think the chances, if he had to play, especially since it's not going on the road into a hostile environment, I think they'd actually be fine in that game. And that offense is ready to adapt to whoever's back there.
From your perspective, Josh, I'm curious as a defender yourself, right? I mean, your 2014 Ohio State team, you guys had 3 quarterbacks that, played at some points, or 2 quarterbacks played throughout the season. Obviously, your starter goes down early in the year, but it's something that defenses have to prepare for, especially when there's not a lot of tape on either JT Barrett and especially Cardale Jones. Going into this game, right, where it could be Drew Aller, it could be Bo Prabula, very limited film on Bo and his playing. How tough is it from a defensive standpoint where both Aller and Prabula kind of run the offense differently? How tough is it to prepare when you kind of have 2 different guys that you're not, one, unsure who's going to play, and 2, that they kind of run different styles of offense?
It is a mental challenge to have to go through because throughout the week you're preparing. And so, every team that Penn State has to play has to prepare for both of the quarterbacks because they use packages with Bo. And so in your mind, you're like, okay, when Drew Aller is in the game, this is more of what the offense looks like. And you have your plan for that, and you have your mentality ready for that. Then you say, okay, Bo comes in, and this is the way that the offense changes. And these are the things that I have to be on alert for now. And Penn State makes you take it a step further where it's like, okay, now they're in Wildcat where they've got Singleton back there, and he's the one taking the snap. What are the things that they have done? I always have to know where Tyler Warren is because they're going to line him up outside. They'll line him up in the slot. They will put him in line. They'll line him up at quarterback, and he might even snap the football and then go catch a touchdown pass. And it is one of the most challenging things as a defender because you have to flip between these different mentalities of how you want to play, how aggressive you can be, what the play calling paradigm is going to be like. And so, the more tired you get throughout a game, the harder it is to think. And I think that's where Penn State creates advantages.
As a defender, how do you approach game planning for Ohio State's offense right now? Obviously, Will Howard, his ability to throw, his mobility, two great backs, a multitude of really talented wide receivers. But does that truly matter when if you could win in the trenches, right? A lot of this is going to come down to the health and Ohio State's offensive line against Penn State's defensive line. How do you game plan with all of that talent, but knowing there could be a real advantage or disadvantage up front?
Yeah, it's one of the tough ones because naturally my mindset goes to eliminate the run game and make them be a drop back team. And one of the hard parts about that is when you say we're going to stop the run and we're going to make it really difficult for them, you have to ask the question, can we do it without creating the numbers advantage? Like, do we think that our front and our linebackers are well equipped against that offensive line to stop them? Because you mentioned like those running backs are really good. And if they start to break tackles or, they hit one of those seams that opens and closes really quickly, you could be in trouble. If you do want to get more aggressive in terms of trying to stop the run, now you create the one-on-one advantages on the outside for Ohio State. Those guys have been pretty good. So it's a challenge. I think with the offensive line in the current construction, I would let the front eat, right? Like, and we've seen some of those guys for Penn State who have done well. Obviously, Abdul Carter's been really good. Zane Durant on the interior is a guy for me who I think is a real problem. Like, I have him circled as potentially the biggest game changer for Penn State because Ohio State might be in a spot where they're kicking out Donovan Jackson. And now all of a sudden, your center and your two guards might be the guys that you try to put in conflict there. And so I think that would be the approach. I would start off letting my front just go out there and eat. And then we'll figure it out if we need to add more guys into the run fit.
It might be too early to tell, but compared to the team that you won a national championship with, Michael Thomas, Curtis Samuel, Zeke, and the skill, I know it's early, but the skill that Ohio State has this year, some people have said this is the most talented team on paper. How does this group compare to some of the great Ohio State teams at the skill positions that you've seen?
I mean, the skill is ridiculous. Like I look at those guys and it was funny because before Ohio State made the trip to Oregon, I went there to do a feature with Emeka Ibuka and Jeremiah Smith. And that was my first time meeting Jeremiah in person. He is humongous. That dude looks like an alien, man. Like, I don't know where you find them like that, but like if they could find more of those, it'd be unstoppable. And so I like Mike Thomas was a big wide receiver. Like Jeremiah just it looks different, right? He runs different. All those different things. So for me, I think I would lean toward this skill group.
Wow.
Ezekiel Elliott probably makes it a little bit difficult to say that because the run he went on toward the end of the year and then what he continued to do in 15 and beyond when he stepped into the NFL was absolutely crazy. But like they have created a very talented just collection of skill in Columbus.
You're not wrong. And Tripp and I were going down memory lane of that 2014 team. It's just like your mind is blown with how much talent was on it, not just at the skill, but also on the interior and in the trenches, offensive line, defensive line. And we saw last week against Nebraska, right, Joshua? Like all the skill in the world is tremendous. But if you can't block up front, that offense got bogged down, only 21 points. The run game was non-existent, 2.1 yards per carry. It's just inexcusable for how much talent they have there in the backfield. So you talked about how Penn State would attack Ohio State's offense, right, in this game. What about on the reverse? Obviously, if you're Ohio State, right now your offensive line is a question mark. How do you go into this game? Like, how do you run your offense to try to protect right now what is a major weak spot on the left side?
Yeah, I think it comes down to scheme in a lot of ways. And I thought that the game plan against Nebraska was a little bit too vanilla up front. They kind of went back to what we saw over the last couple of years where it was a lot of the zone run schemes, the stretch runs that hadn't had a ton of success. And I think they need to get back to some more of the man blocking, creating double teams up front, gap schemes with pullers, things of that nature, so they can try to create extra gaps that way. That's where I would start. I'd love them to get into a really good kind of triple option game plan as well, which we saw a little bit earlier where they were doing the RPO, but they really incorporated Will Howard's legs into that equation. And then the thing that worked, like the highlight of the offense was the deep ball. And Will Howard's not a great deep ball thrower, and they hit a couple of shots over the top that went for touchdowns. And I think the shots are going to be extremely important in this game, because it might come down to being able to get chunks of yardage at a time if you can't consistently run the football. Like I said, Penn State, front-wise, it is going to be a challenge, but I think if they can get opportunities one-on-one, which the Penn State defense, we know they like to be aggressive and they will go with single coverage, you have to be able to capitalize on those.
How about that Ohio State defense? One of the big differences last season was the elimination of big plays. And for the most part, they've eliminated this year, with the exception of that Oregon game where it reared its ugly head again. So where do you feel like the Ohio State defense is at going against probably, and I know Penn State doesn't have the wide receiver threats that Oregon has, but Tyler Warren, Singleton, Allen in the backfield, probably the second best offense they've faced to this point.
Yeah, it's a really interesting way that you have to attack it, because I do think they could go one-on-one with the wide receivers and feel like they have an advantage there. But you mentioned Warren, and the hard part is, like, they'll use formations to expose your coverage and then find out where the mismatch is. If you try to, I've seen teams try to cover him with a cornerback. Like, that's a really tough assignment. Do you have a safety that's athletic enough that you feel like can help you size-wise? I would not put a linebacker on that guy. So it kind of limits what you're able to do if you want to go with some one-on-one coverage. The other thing for Ohio State is, like, the pass rush is just not what it needs to be. Those guys struggle to win one-on-one. I don't think they have very built-out pass rush trees. It doesn't look like they always have a plan. And when they wanted to get aggressive last week, they created huge voids in the pocket. And a guy like Dylan Raiola, who's not the greatest athlete at quarterback, was getting yards on the ground. They have to have a solution for that. So I think job number one is ID Tyler Warren and then have a plan for him. Job number two is, when it's time to get after the quarterback, when it's second and longer, when it's a third and obvious passing situation, you got to have guys who can get home. We saw JT a couple years ago put together the best game I've ever seen from an edge rusher. Can he create some more magic? Not exactly sure, but, like, it's going to need to be a game like that.
Do you miss suiting up on a sorry, Ryan. Do you miss suiting up on a when you have a matchup like this, 3 versus 4? How much do you miss getting out there on a Saturday?
It is one of the craziest things. Like, my emotions are so wrapped up into these games. And it's not just when Ohio State's playing. Like, any game where I feel like there are stakes and consequences, like, I feel so connected to it. Listen, I got probably like one short series in me before I'm pulling a hamstring or breaking a collarbone. So I know it's not for me right now, but just, the vision of being on the field and running out in the tunnel. I played at Penn State twice at night. The idea of silencing that crowd specifically is something that just, like, it sits in the back of my mind constantly.
May have many plays left in you, Joshua, but at least when you did on the field, you obviously won a national title, right? Know what it takes to win. Obviously, you need talent. And this Ohio State team, it's not arguable. They have the talent to win a national title. But there are other things that go into it. You know what it takes. I'm curious, like, when you watch this Ohio State team this year, do they have that, for lack of a better term, like, championship? Like, I guess maybe I'll ask it this way. What defines a championship culture? I mean, you watch Ohio State this year. Do they have it?
I'm not sure yet. I think the Oregon game was probably the best indicator up to this point. And I think we know that they can be competitive in those games. There is this uncommon commitment to never letting your teammates down, and an uncommon commitment to, like, finishing every play to the best of your ability that needs to be there. And I think that was our biggest superpower as a team in 14. We were very unsure of ourselves early on in the season. Obviously, talk about the quarterback situation. We took a loss. We had installed a brand new defense we're still trying to get the hang of. But I think one of the things that we relied on as a team was that we weren't going to let each other down. And our commitment wasn't to ourselves and our stats and our draft stock. Our commitment was to making sure that our teammates were always proud of each other. And I think somebody in that locker room probably has to have a little bit of a sit down and put that back in the forefront, because we know that the ingredients are there and there's still time for this, like this foxhole mentality to develop. I'm not sure it's fully cooked yet, and they need to continue to work on that.
Among the top 3-4 teams in the big, like, I think you have to put Indiana in the conversation now, no matter what the preseason prognostications were. Penn State, Oregon, Indiana, Ohio State. Where do you feel like this group, and I know you're focused on the Big Ten each week nationally, and you can't watch every single game, but where do you feel like this group stacks up with the rest of the upper echelon teams across the nation?
This group as in
the Big Ten teams, Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, Indiana. Will a national champion, put you on the spot, will a national champion come out of that group?
Likely, yes. I do believe that. This is one of the most unique years. Everybody is so flawed. Everybody is. And I think Oregon's kind of gotten past theirs. They struggled to protect early on. They've had some turnover issues from time to time. I didn't think their defense was really gelling. They're playing really clean football as of right now. We talked about Ohio State and what we think they can be. I think Penn State's certainly in the mix. And Indiana is the best coach team I watch on a week-to-week basis. They are phenomenal at doing things to not hurt themselves. When you start to look at, Georgia, for example, they got an offense problem right now. Carson Beck likes to throw it to the other team, struggled to run the football. Championship level defense when they come to play, but they have shown that they have some problems. You look at a team like Texas. Does Texas have the edge that it really takes to be a championship team? When they got smacked by Georgia, kind of retreated a little bit, right? Miami has played with fire so many times this year. And I'm not exactly sure that the Big 12 has a team that's really going to win a title. So whoever comes out of the top of the Big 10 or whatever teams get into the CFP, I think they've got as good of a shot as anybody nationally to go win the whole thing.
When you look at this parity, Joshua, is there anything you can attribute to? I mean, obviously there's a lot of changes, 12-team playoff now this year, but NIL, transfer portal, is it just better coaching? Is it NIL keeping players in college, transfer portal? Is there anything you can kind of look at and say, it feels like, at least to me, and to hear you talking, it sounds like it as well, this is the first time in a long time you could truly say college football is open. I mean, we're in November, and we could talk about 10 teams competing for a national title maybe. It feels like, at least to me, it's been the most wide open it's been in a while. Is there anything when you kind of look at it from week to week you can point to and say, this is why?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of a 12-team playoff has kept many teams engaged. I think early on is why we saw some teams, group of 5 teams, either pull off upsets or get really close, because they're like, we actually have a shot to compete in the college football playoff. I think for a long time, those teams looked at the power teams and said, we're playing a different sport right now, and they're not. And so I think that's part of it. The roster construction intrigues me because some of the quarterbacks are more veteran, and I think they are really taking the opportunity to look at fit and how they can fit into a system. And so that's where you see some of the transfers, the Will Howards and Dylan Gabriels of the world kind of doing their thing. And I think that's been intriguing. But outside of that, it's just really hard to explain. I just think it's one of those years where the chaos god said we want to get involved in college football, and I think we all welcomed it.
Joshua, we'll let you go after this. We started talking about your TV Saturday and what it's like for you to prepare for these games. I've always been a fan of yours since you started, and working with Big Ten Network and real pros like Jerry's been around a long time. Howard's been around a long time. And I think Dave Revson is the great host of TV in college football because of his breadth of knowledge. What has the transition been like for you, and doing it so rapidly, I think, from your playing career, college, and the NFL to TV, and what have you enjoyed about it?
It's been a dream for me, and I say this, and I hope my bosses don't listen anytime I say it, but, I get paid money to do something I would do for free. And I could not imagine having a better career that is fulfilling. It keeps me tied into something that I enjoy, but I kind of found a sweet spot of something that I could be really good at. And so I'm fortunate for that. You mentioned some of the people that I've gotten to work with. I think that's been a big part of my development, honestly, is just being around true professionals who, gave me tools and space to grow in a way that I have. And I think my career has been unique in a lot of ways because play at Ohio State, obviously a huge brand. I think winning a championship and being a captain there certainly helped that. But, a lot of people who get the opportunity to go on and do the national shows are names. They're people who won national awards in college and went on to play in the NFL for a decade. And that's not me. I got into this thing when I was 24 or 25 years old. I'm 30 right now. And it's like, that's not supposed to happen. And so I take every day with a certain level of appreciation for the not only the sport, but the craft and the career and the people that I work with. And I'm excited that I get to be a part of it. And I think the cool thing with NBC, obviously being in prime time covering the Big Ten has been great. But you look at the crew that we've been able to put together, and I think there is so much diversity of knowledge and of the positions that were played. We've got Nicole Auerbach, who is a woman who is one of the most prominent voices in this thing, and a female host, and Maria Taylor. Like, I think we represent in a lot of ways what the college football viewing public actually is. And I think it becomes relatable to us. So for many reasons, I am fortunate, and for many reasons, I'm proud.
Well, a part of that NBC team, Catherine Tappan, got her exercise in Madison last weekend with all the injuries during that game. She was back and forth on the sideline, and it was fun to trade some notes with her during the game. But Joshua, you do a great job, and we appreciate the time today.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
I wanted to bring it full circle at the end because I am fascinated and enamored with the media career that he's had. But outside of that, a lot of great X's and O's in there. What was your biggest takeaway? Anything jump out to you from that conversation with Joshua?
I was surprised to hear him say that he's not sure yet when asked if this is like a championship team, if they have that DNA that it takes to win a title. Like, we know, right, they are insanely talented. But like you talk about, or at least what was talked about before the season with the roster and the transfer portal work and everything they brought back, it was like assumed, like Ohio State's going to win the national title. They're the favorites for a reason, obviously. But like hearing a player who knows what it takes to go through, that knows like the gritty work you have to do, and the mental toughness you have to kind of break through, not only just have the talent, but also have everything else as well to kind of meld that together. It's interesting to hear him say that. I don't disagree. To be honest with you, Trip, because I think so far you've seen like in the late game against Oregon, kind of the wheels fall off. And then most recently against Nebraska, that was a team right now that looked broken. I, though, thought because of Ryan Day, because how good this team did, like he would have trusted that this would have been a team that could bounce back. And it's really interesting going to this game where this could potentially, depending on how things break, be an elimination game for Ohio State against the Buckeyes. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I don't think an elimination game because they'll still have the opportunity to play.
I said potentially.
Yeah, because they'll have the opportunity to play Indiana. You win that game, they're going to be in Ohio State at 10-2 in the college football playoff. There's two takeaways and a reaction to what you just said. Number one, going into the year, you can identify the one weakness, and it's been interesting to see it's played out that offensive line, because they don't have the depth there. I think if they stayed healthy, it's a different story. Right. But the offensive line, it's truly played out as a weakness. And that's something that you can't snap your finger in the middle of a season and fix. You just can't. Even in this portal era, you can't fix that mid-season. What is one thing I think you can develop over the course of a season is that identity, that culture, that DNA that you're talking about. When does Ohio State, have they had that moment where it all comes together? Trailing Nebraska at home, long touchdown drive, take the lead, defensive stop at the end. It wasn't pretty, but they did win the game off of a bye week. To me, the loss to Oregon, getting pushed at home, and then finding a way, banged up, to win that game. Is that and we won't learn that until this week in Happy Valley against Penn State. But did they have a moment that it starts to click into play? And some teams don't, right? They're just, and look at the hat I have on, right? The Philadelphia Eagles 2023 season was a mess at the end of the year because they never had that moment where you have all this talent and it's just going to click and it's going to come together for you. So I'm not saying they had the moment, but you can develop with leadership, coaching, culture, And I think it has to come from inside the locker room more than a coach in this instance. That's something that you can build throughout the course of the season. And there is still time, and I think Joshua kind of referenced this, there is still time for that to correct itself and develop. That, to me, is the biggest question about Ohio State.
And I think now that shifts, and you heard Joshua talk about the pressure in terms of this game. I think that does shift to Ryan Day, because now as an offensive mind, I know he's not calling the plays, it's Chip Kelly, but him and Chip Kelly are working in concert together, right, to get this team over the hump. And we talked about the talent, right? Like that 2014. I mean, you heard Joshua say that the 2024 team, skill-wise, is more talented.
Yeah, and we haven't even listed, he mentioned JTT and what they have. We haven't even mentioned their list of defensive players that they have that are outstanding on this year's team as well. So it's a very, very talented football team. But to his point, and to the points we've made, you can say that about 10 other football teams right now. Penn State with Abdul Carter, denied Dennis Sutton, again, healthy, not, big question mark, Drew Aller, Tyler Warren. You're looking at a team that could potentially have 3-4 first-round draft picks on that roster this year. Michigan has 3 or 4 first-round NFL draft picks on its roster. Oregon, same thing. Texas, Georgia, there may be parity, but everyone's got talent. Everyone's got talent. So what is the differentiating factor? Is it coaching? Is it an identity? Is it a culture? What differentiates between these teams? And again, and I should mention Indiana in there too, because they are playing like a championship caliber football team right now that knows how to win.
I think it is coaching. To your point of like, what is the differentiating factor? I think it is coaching, because you like what Joshua said, and I agree. There is at least one flaw, maybe multiple flaws, in almost every top 10 team in the country. Like every team that's competing for a championship, nobody's bulletproof, nobody is perfect. And so it is, I think, a large part of coaching. How can you get your guys in a position to succeed? How can you cover up whatever the flaw or weakness may be? In the Buckeyes case, right, is obviously the offensive line. Although it's interesting kind of hearing Joshua's discussion about how you kind of, game plan for that, taking deep shots. Now you're going to need time, right? And you're going to need probably max protection. We saw Michigan last year when they played Penn State and they couldn't block Chop Robinson among some of the other great defensive ends Penn State had, that they just said, you know what, we're going to put 8 linemen on the field. We're going to run the ball down your throat. And they found a way to win. It's going to be on Ryan Day to find a way to win this game, to make sure the one weakness right now on this roster is not taking away from the insane talent they have everywhere else.
And that's why when you look at this, and we'll dive more into this in our preview episode, but what Andy Kotelnicki did with Bo Pribula at Wisconsin when they had to adjust their game plan, what Tom Allen has done in his mid-game adjustments for Penn State, Chip Kelly, Jim Knowles are excellent coordinators. James Franklin had Manny Diaz last year as his defensive coordinator. Excellent coordinator, excellent coach. But now you feel like Penn State has an X factor at the offensive coordinator spot in concert with James Franklin, the head coach. But you feel like Penn State's got an X factor there that matches some of these other teams at that coordinator position. And it's not that, Mike Yursich was very successful at other stops and where he's been. It's not that he's a bad football coach, but whatever Kotelnicki has brought to the program has resonated with Franklin and has resonated with how quickly he's been able to build those relationships and rapport with his players, very similar to what Joe Moorhead did when he was at Penn State. And there's a trust and there's a respect there. And you figure, no matter who's at quarterback for Penn State, and we talked about the pros and cons of each, I think Penn State feels like, all right, we've got another weapon in our bag right here. Andy can draw this thing up, and you can go toe to toe with what Ryan Day and Chip Kelly bring to the table this year, where that's a true X factor in this football game.
And does feel like, I think in part, the reason why it feels like, at least for the first time in a long time, there's a real chance here Ohio State could lose this game. We've talked about how well Penn State matches up in the past. They've come close. They've pushed Ohio State, but since 2016, not been able to break through. There's a real belief right now from Penn State fans and this team. It seems like that this is the year. This could be the first time in 8 years that they actually break through here and take down Ohio State. It's going to be a really fun game on Saturday in Happy Valley. I hope you enjoyed that discussion with Joshua Perry. Again, one of the best. He's absolutely tremendous. Fun going down memory lane with him. Also tremendous getting his insight on this Ohio State team, on the Big Ten overall. He is great. But Trip, this is just the beginning. This is just bonus material getting set for a big matchup here. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you do get your pods on YouTube as well. We are all over the digital form, giving you, hopefully, at least in your mind, the best Big Ten content out there. So we will be back, depending on when you listen to this, later today on Thursday. Tomorrow, if you listen to this on Wednesday, we got a big Week 10 preview lined up here with, should we say it, Trip, a special Penn State guest as well to get the other perspective of this game? Should we tease it? Do you want to say it? I'll leave it up to you here.
Cross your fingers, cross your toes. But I think we've got a great episode. I think we have a great episode Thursday. And we'll also talk about what is, there are some other interesting games out there in the Big Ten. Some may call it a big week of Big Ten football. Can I just reiterate? Like, subscribe, rate, share, whatever it takes. Please do that for our podcast.
Hey, it's free, right? The pod is free. All we're asking for is just one click of the button. That's it. Simple. You do that for us. We'll continue to hopefully give you the best Big Ten content we can. So appreciate listening. Appreciate Joshua again. We'll talk to you to get ready for a big Week 10 right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.